So in this talk, as was already mentioned, I'm going to delve a little bit more into the contemporary situation in the U.S. and how Maoist politics can be applied today. This involves, on one hand, some analysis of the objective situation here to break down some of the contradictions and gain clarity on what actually we're facing, and then also some ideas about what's needed then to, in practice, to overcome this. Of course, we don't have all the answers, but we have some ideas based on our experiences in practice and based on historical struggles from the past and contemporary struggles as well. Just to start off, I think we need to be square that the U.S. state was founded on the slavery and genocide of Native people, on slavery and the genocide of Native people. Even though we no longer live in a slave society with settler colonialism, the white supremacy, which was the foundation of this country, still exists today in quite a powerful form, in a different form, of course. And we see this, for example, at the ideological level with the constant equation of criminality with blackness in contemporary media, but also more broadly in the brutality of police, in the reservations for Native people where there's extreme poverty and often they're encircled by various white supremacist forces, but of course also with deportation rates, which reach record numbers under Obama and now are going even higher under Trump. And in mass incarceration, where 2.5 million people roughly are kept in chains and in cells, not to mention the 7 million or so who are dealing with the parole system and navigating, trying to reproduce themselves given the real difficulties being employed and getting housing as a convicted felon or the like. Really, the relative comfort of the U.S. middle class and the profits of the capitalist class are maintained actually by this threat of force at home and abroad, U.S. imperialism abroad, and white supremacy is a manifestation of that at home. From the imperialist wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria to U.S. military bases all over, we see really clearly how the U.S. capitalist class maintains their global supremacy and also is attempting to counteract the rise of other imperialist powers like Russia and China. That's all part of the larger situation, but it does directly apply to how things play out here in the U.S. At home, cheap consumer goods for the middle class are produced by highly exploited service workers, again at home and also abroad, like in factories in Foxconn in China. Also by migrant workers, often in the country without official legal documentation and then constantly facing the risk of forced removal. And prison laborers, too, who are paid pennies an hour. This is all, actually, these are essential components of the white supremacist capitalist system. They're not excesses that can be alleviated through reformist efforts here or there. They're fundamental to the reproduction of our society on a daily basis. More broadly, capitalist imperialism at home and abroad facilitate the brutal accumulation and concentration of wealth by the ruling class in this country, and you can see this in the extreme disparities in wealth that are unprecedented in all of human history that exists today. And in some of the decadence of the bourgeoisie, one example, Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, regularly gets blood transfusions from young people to keep him younger, he says. It gets at really the vampiric, actually, nature of capitalism. It's quite disturbing. It's one simple example. There's a lot more like that, and people are signing up for his new company that will allow them to do that. As a result of this, the growing number of people in this country and abroad are left with nothing, really, no possessions of their own. And what's more, because of capitalist social relations, many of these people simply cannot be employed under capitalism. This is a reality. Actually, as more capitalism develops, the greater number of what's called surplus population. It's just not profitable to have enough jobs to go around. These people who have no possessions of their own are not employed due to the objective contradictions of capitalism, effectively really have no proper place within capitalist society, and again form what Marx called surplus population or the reserve army of labor. We should be clear, really, I think, that the reserve army of labor is part of the working class and part of the proletariat. If we're confused on that, then we actually fail to organize with a significant percentage of this country. The unemployed, the homeless, the refugees, those who have to resort to illegal or semi-legal forms of employment, from prostitution to collecting scrap metal, actually are all an important part of the proletariat and provide a revolutionary base if organized correctly. And given the white supremacist nature of U.S. society, it comes as no surprise that the reserve army of labor is disproportionately composed of black, Latino, and indigenous people. They are, as the saying goes, last hired, first fired. These people's existence is actually in this situation where barely eking out a small living, trying to survive through various means, collecting bottles and the like, is again actually essential for the functioning of capitalism. But they also do pose a major threat in terms of social unrest, and they have really little to no stake in the existing system. There are real contradictions to organizing them, but if done successfully, it can provide an incredible revolutionary base. In addition to this, there are a huge number of working people in an incredibly precarious position, or even one misstep, missing a day of work, being late on rent, having a child get sick, etc., could lead to them joining the reserve army of labor and being replaced in the workplace by one member of that reserve army. This is really actually the contradiction essential to capitalism, where workers compete to sell their labor power on the market. And this actually defines a lot of workplaces. If you've ever worked in a proletarian job, you know there is actually often intense competition. Capitalists are constantly interviewing and bringing new people in as a constant threat that people are quite aware of. If they step out of line, they could lose everything very quickly. Missing a rent payment leads to getting evicted, leads to homelessness. It's a lot of money, for example, to get a deposit and first and last month's rent to get a new house. But there's also a shared interest these people have in overcoming oppression and exploitation. And through patient organizing amongst the working class on a daily basis in their struggles in their workplaces, actually the latter, the shared interest in overcoming oppression, can become dominant over the competition. Of course, right now competition is dominant. We should be square about that and what that represents. But through serious political work, the proletariat can be organized into a fighting force that really can transform the world. Of course, the key question that's in front of us, given this objective situation, is how can we do this? Actually, what's needed to overcome this competition and the oppression that people face daily? Really, a key aspect of Maoist politics is the need to fuse with the working class, the employed, and the reserve army of labor in their daily struggles. These people, again, have an objective interest in revolutionary politics to free them from the chains that shackle them. It is through working alongside them in their daily struggles that we can demonstrate the shared basis of unity in practice. And that's a key point. And have actually this become the shared basis of unity become dominant. I really want to talk a little bit about what it means to demonstrate the basis in practice, because it's really actually necessary to demonstrate that oppression and exploitation can be overcome, of course, in the long-term sense, but also on the day-to-day sense, that there's an ability to, through uniting, through not just being isolated individuals, but through uniting and struggling to overcome the reactionary attitudes of a manager or the oppressive police or the landlords. Because of the difficulties of the contemporary situation, many working people more broadly, too, among the petty bourgeoisie, are quite nihilistic and feel correctly that they're incredibly isolated. But this, again, can be overcome, but the key is on practice, not just on theoretical sloganeering or referring to past historical struggles, which may seem vague, even if they are quite relevant for our particular situation. And this unity is then actually built through struggle together against a common and shared enemy, but also in struggling internally to clarify issues and decide the way forward and what the issues are actually even that we face. But fusing with the proletariat and their daily struggles, it doesn't mean lifestyle activism, it doesn't mean NGO careerism, and it doesn't mean charity work. This has already been said before, but I really want to drive this home. It's about joining them in their daily struggles in the workplace, in the neighborhoods, and other places. And this is really a major dividing line in left politics at present. Most political organizations, even many self-described Marxist and socialist groups, actually dominantly seek to organize petty bourgeois students. Well, of course, there's a real basis for radical students to play a very positive role in revolutionary struggles. It's absolutely necessary to relate this work to the daily struggles of the working class in a non-formalistic manner. The oppressed and exploited people of the working class constitute the majority of the people in the United States. In order to overthrow the ruling class and break all chains, these masses of people must take up politics for themselves and must be the leading force in the revolution. This question of what it means to be the leading force doesn't just mean numerically, it doesn't just mean be the majority of people involved. Of course, that's necessary, but it really means that the masses of people have to be at the front and center of leaders taking the leading role in thinking and discussing and debating and deciding the way forward. Students can't do this for them, neither can a group of so-called revolutionaries who are at a distance from them. And the dominant way to engage with the working class amongst the left today is to get them to show up to a rally, hold a sign, say a few chants, and go home. It doesn't really actually engage concretely with the ideas the masses have. It's quite condescending, saying, we've got the answers, you're just the workers, you don't understand this intellectual stuff, just follow up and we'll guide you down the right path. We need to break from that shit because it goes nowhere. The comrade in the last talk discussed a little bit about how Mao and the CCP developed political organization amongst the masses in the countryside and the independence actually of these organizations from the nationalists. And this work and this independence from the so-called progressive forces of the time allowed the masses of people really to take up politics and was crucial to the success of the Chinese Revolution. It wasn't just the communists in the countryside saying, oh, masses, here's the solution. It was actually through discussions and debates, through taking the masses' ideas seriously, and actually seeing the masses as the leading force in, say, expropriating the wealth of a landlord. Oftentimes in the countryside, the peasants were starving while the landlord had great, huge grain silos and pigs and chickens and other things. And the communists were very clear that they couldn't be the ones to just say, let's go take this, everyone listen to us, that actually the masses had to decide to do this and see the basis for it, understand why it was being done and the like. Similarly, in our contemporary situation, it is essential that we develop political organization amongst the masses of oppressed and exploited people if we are to overthrow the capitalist ruling class and break all the chains of oppression. These political organizations cannot be subordinate to the interests of bourgeois politicians, NGOs, or philanthropic capitalists. And really, that's a key, again, a dividing line. Related to this point, in his text, What is to be Done, which is a really essential Marxist text, Vladimir Lenin commented on how in 1894 there were only a handful of Marxists in Russia. And because of this, because of their real lack of forces, it was actually absolutely necessary for them to focus on their organizing efforts almost exclusively on building deep roots amongst the working class. It was only later that they really were, once they had these deep roots amongst the working class, they were really successful in drawing in more of the radical students. Didn't mean don't engage at all with the radical students, but really seeing that work amongst the working class is primary. As Maoists, we really see that the road ahead is alongside the masses, drawing this lesson from Lenin and Marx as well. The revolution doesn't happen by a self-proclaimed leadership group commanding the struggle, but actually in order to overcome oppression and exploitation, revolutionaries should be amongst the masses. And overcoming oppression and exploitation, again, has a short and long-term aspect. We need to be clear the long-term goal is communism, is breaking all chains and freeing humanity from these shackles that hold us on a daily basis almost everywhere. But also that short-term gains are absolutely essential. We can't just say we'll get there eventually. Actually, victories in a workplace, getting a worker their job back, or overcoming the oppressive tactics of the landlord to evict tenants and sell the building for a profit, are all important gains that need to be made all the way along the way to draw more of the masses into politics through demonstrating the basis for successes in practice. But it really gets at this question, so what does it mean to go amongst the masses? What does it mean to join with them in their daily struggles? First, the masses of people aren't stupid. It sounds like a simple thing to say, but it's often quite negated, actually, by most left groups, saying masses can't really grapple with these things. If we just show up and throw out a bunch of slogans and demand that people listen up, the masses will probably think that we can't win, because we're just saying listen to us, and they'll be right, actually, fundamentally, because that's no way to approach revolutionary politics. And political work can't be understood simply as signing people up for organization or defending victims. Political organization needs to be developed among the masses and by the masses that can facilitate their participation in political struggles. We can see concrete examples of the successes of this approach in the work of the Revolutionary Union, of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Now, all of these groups, in the end, were not successful in creating revolutions. So they did fail. We should learn from their failures, too. But they did have real successes in this approach that are important for us to grapple with in the context of the United States and more broadly. This key task of fusing with the working class and developing revolutionary potential of the oppressed masses is also absolutely essential to combating white supremacy. And really, if we're square about what white supremacy is, it's really the only way to overcome it. White supremacy isn't going to be overcome by some formalistic approach in one way or another of correct representation groups or other things like that. Of course, drawing oppressed people into organization is essential too. I want to also get at this point that the capitalist class have a real interest in maintaining the divisions among the working class and having an ideological justification for killing people, often those in the reserve army of labor, with no political consequences, saying this person's just a criminal or a drug user or whatever, shouldn't have resisted arrest, etc. We're all probably pretty familiar with these justifications. And we should be square that white chauvinist ideas also are reproduced amongst the working class and even the non-white working class. But this doesn't mean that the working class is the root source or main benefactor of white supremacist ideas, as actually is often said by academics today, that the working class is the problem, they're the ones who voted for Trump, they're stupid and uneducated. This is really anti-people logic. Insofar as white supremacy constitutes a material force that divides the working class and oppresses the masses of people, it ultimately serves the interest of the capitalist ruling class in maintaining the status quo. But we must be square about the reality of living in a white supremacist society and the obstacles that must be overcome for the working class to develop into an organized revolutionary force. It's not just simply a formalistic task. There are real concrete obstacles at every level of society. While we should not organize with outright bigots or white supremacists, there are many progressive people who still do have some backwards ideas as a consequence of living in a white supremacist society. But with progressive people who are willing to take criticism and have a sincere desire to smash white supremacy and to destroy oppression, these backwards ideas can be overcome. And really, in order to overcome white supremacy, though, it's necessary to break down the divisions among different workers of different nationalities and build political power that unites them in struggle. Because if there's not a shared basis of unity, then there won't be that key discussion and debate and criticism to get at actually negative and backwards ideas that even relatively progressive people do have. This really takes careful and patient work to build relations across different lines that divide us today. And it's not something that's just going to happen overnight. and really fundamental actually to overcoming white supremacy internal to organizations and externally, is the need to develop and recognize real political leadership by oppressed people, not simply formalistically saying, oh, they're on the leadership group, but really actually seeing what that means to chart a path forward, not just in the struggle against white supremacy, but also in the larger struggle as well. Through really clarity in this points, as well as discussion and debate, clarity in the point of the need for leadership of oppressed people, but also as well as discussions, debates, and commonly criticism, white supremacy can be overcome internal to political organizations and also smashed in larger society. And really, I think we need to be clear about the difference there between the contradictions amongst the people who have a shared interest in overcoming and demonstrate a shared interest in overcoming oppression, and the contradictions amongst the enemy who actually fundamentally it's in their interest to maintain oppression, like rapists and pigs and capitalists. And again, this point just that there needs to be local gains, short-term gains, and also this long-term picture of what we're really trying to do concretely. What does it mean to destroy white supremacy? Not just a few checks and balances here or there, but actually fundamentally get at the root issue. And this relates to the earlier point about the white supremacist nature of the state since its inception. What's actually needed to overcome that? Because as long as the state remains a capitalist state, as long as it dominantly serves the interests of the capitalist class, the U.S. will remain a white supremacist country. Related, another type of oppression that actually is essential that we also organize to overcome is the patriarchal oppression of women and non-men. We really need to be clear on this point that actually the oppression of women has been an essential part of class society since its inception, and therefore actually the struggle for the emancipation of women and non-men must be part of a larger struggle to transform society overall. Similarly to white supremacy, the question of the state interest in maintaining this oppression is key, but also we should be clear in both these cases that simply having a revolution doesn't solve these problems either. It's a prolonged process afterwards, as Jonathan spoke of, the class struggle under socialism concretely. Continuing that is a big part of that is overcoming national chauvinism, will be overcoming national chauvinism in the U.S. and patriarchal attitude. There's a real need for the masses of oppressed and exploited women to take up politics and to struggle for emancipation in a sustained and revolutionary manner. Much like with white supremacy, this task can't be deferred until after the revolution. As often sometimes said, we'll have the revolution and then, we'll be good. It must be tackled here and now, as the liberation of oppressed people is actually an essential process, part of the process of developing revolutionary political power. In order to do this, we must grapple with how patriarchy is reproduced at all levels of society and develop practices to overcome it. This work really has to go beyond simply defending victims of patriarchal violence. There's a dominant line that says we need to support people who have been abused victims. It's true, we should support people who have been the victims of patriarchal oppression. But we should also see that these people who are victims can also become agents in revolutionary struggle, and not simply condescendingly say, oh, they're a victim, we're here, our role is to support them, their role is to speak on their experiences. There needs to be more than that. In the last instance, patriarchy serves the interests of the capitalist ruling class. Now, there are, of course, members of the working class who benefit from patriarchy as well. For example, working class men can more readily secure jobs and receive greater compensation than their female and non-male counterparts. That's a real material reality. Despite these benefits, though, male members of the working class are still exploited by the capitalist ruling class and often live in quite precarious positions. Thus, generally speaking, they do have an interest and stake in revolutionary politics and overcoming patriarchy in a way that members of the ruling class do not. And that's a fundamental difference. Again, we need to get at the difference between the ruling class and the working class, and who can potentially be a political a friend in the political struggle to break all chains. In this way, we can really clarify the differences between the masses of people and the enemies of the people. We must really take different approaches, as I mentioned earlier, regarding white supremacy in dealing with these two camps. If we're not clear on that, then we mistake a friend for an enemy and attack someone brutally when they should be presented with comradely criticism. And on the other side, just as bad, we mistake an enemy for a friend and seek to unite with them when fundamentally they're not at all interested in uniting with the masses for revolution and for communism. Internal to political organization, this is essential work. Two, there needs to be real work, for example, to overcome divisions of labor, unnecessary divisions of labor along gendered but also national lines, for example, ensuring that both men and women are engaged in mental and manual labor, like drafting a flyer and distributing the flyer, even something as simple as that. But also, of course, among the question of leadership and childcare and artistic endeavors and every aspect of political work. Really, combating male chauvinism internal to political organizations is crucial work that allows the masses to take up, and especially the masses of oppressed and exploited women to take, and non-men to take up and play a leading role, not only in the struggle to overcome patriarchy, which is of course a key part of the larger struggle, but of revolutionary political struggles overall. We can't just say women and non-men should be the leading force in overcoming patriarchy, but secondary and everything else. No, they need to be a leading force of overcoming oppression and exploitation in the workplace, and so on. And I really think, again, to refer back to the previous talk, that we can see some very important examples of how this is done in a different situation, but a relevant situation, by the Maoists in India, where female comrades really play a leading role in all levels of political work, from the Central Committee to the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, where women compose roughly 40% of the force. Although these tasks, all these tasks are really essential in the larger struggle to overcome and eventually destroy patriarchy and the material basis on which it rests. Well, this struggle may take many lifetimes. There's really essential work to be done here and now. And again, to refer back to India, the work that the comrades there did in the 60s and 70s really laid the basis for the gains that we can see today. So it's not simply, oh man, we're not at that stage yet, as sometimes said we can't get there. No, we can do key work now, and we have to. Just to close up, I want to just focus really on what it means to go forward, and this question that we face, how to go forward and build a revolutionary movement to break all chains. As was already stated, there is a need for political organization. There is a need, we can't just assume that these things are just going to happen. There is a need for principled political organization that fundamentally serves the people and is not subordinated to the ruling class or their political parties. We also need to develop and link up disparate mass struggles and create organizations as well amongst the masses that can play a leading role in these struggles and coordinate. We've really seen the difficulty, again, as was already mentioned, but I want to drive this point home. We can see the difficulty of developing and sustaining mass participation in politics in recent struggles. Occupy is a key example, although there was positive and negative aspects of Occupy. It really failed on this major question of what it means to sustain mass participation, what it means to keep going, because there was a real lack of clarity on that point, as well as other points. But there's also thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of local struggles in this country where members of the masses and small groups, or even individually, stand up to the police, to managers, to bosses, to landlords, and other oppressors, really in an attempt to transform their situation. But the isolation amongst the masses at present is so brutal that oftentimes they're just crushed, and it's impossible for one or two individuals to stand up to the oppressive system of capitalist relations which holds all of humanity in chains. There needs to be coordination of these struggles so that members of the masses, when they do see the basis for opposing oppression, can link up with others, can develop and coordinate these struggles, and can grow really into a force that's unstoppable. And so for revolutionaries, our key task is really to join the masses in their struggles in a non-formalistic manner, really to go amongst them, to be amongst them, and to transform ourselves in this process, and develop political organization in which members of the masses can play a leading role. As Mao said, the party must swim with the masses like a fish in water. The quote was already said, but it is worth repeating. What does that mean? It means to be there every day with them, not just for a rally once a month, not just occasionally when one goes down there, not to go amongst them as an NGO activist where one is paid to be there to help a few people out and sign them up for a program. This really relates to a point that Mao talks about. It's a complicated point, and I can't get at all of the aspects of it, but this idea of the mass line, sometimes put out as from the masses to the masses, developing, is based on this idea that the masses do have correct ideas. Fundamentally, people are really grappling with the situation they face, the oppression and exploitation daily. But these ideas are dispersed and often mixed with other positive and negative ideas. There's a need to really concentrate these positive ideas of the masses through political work amongst them, through organizations, so these ideas can be drawn and synthesized. The most advanced ideas of the masses can be drawn out and synthesized and then shared with the masses in other locations or those who don't quite see it as clearly as other people do. And this can all further mass initiative and draw more members of the masses into politics, and demonstrates the basis and successes of struggles locally, and then linking these struggles up nationally and seeing how they relate to international struggles. The goal is not simply to make people Maoists, but to facilitate the masses of people everywhere taking up politics and breaking all chains. Really, what was already said by Glenda, really daring to struggle and daring to win. To close, I just want to read a poem by Mao. It's in this book, which is a great book if you're interested in get it. The title of the poem is A Way to All Pests. The title of the book is A Way with All Pests. It's based on this poem by Mao. It's about this British surgeon who went to China and spent a long time in the People's Republic, and deals with a lot of the different mass struggles and how actually under socialism, at every level, these struggles played out of society, getting rid of literal pests that were quite serious and keeping people sick, and also the reactionary forces who sought to prevent the masses of people from taking up politics. That it's not your time, you can't really grapple with these ideas and so on.
What is the title?
A Way with All Pests.
A Way with All Pests. Jonathan Horn.
Joshua Horn.
I always want to say
So I'll just read the poem from Mao to close. You'll see the dual meaning of pests, literal pests, but metaphorical pests as well. On this tiny globe, a few flies dash themselves against the wall, humming without cease, sometimes shrilling, sometimes moaning. Ants on the locust tree assume a great nation's swagger, and mayflies lightly plot to topple the giant tree. The west wind scatters them over Chang'an. The arrows are flying, twanging, and so many deeds cry out to be done. And always urgently. The world rolls on, time presses. 10,000 years are too long. Seize the day, seize the hour. The 4 seas are rising, clouds and waters raging. The 5 continents are rocking, wind and thunder roaring. Away with all pests, our force is irresistible. Now, that was written at a different time in 1963, a different situation. But it really does speak, I think, quite powerfully to what's possible. The revolutionary potential of the masses can sweep away all pests and can become an irresistible and undefeatable force. But at present, it's hard to see that. And I think that's what we need to do as revolutionaries. We need to see the basis, although it's not right in front of us, to go amongst the masses and develop that force.